The morning my daughter-in-law threw my suitcase onto the front lawn, I was standing in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the bedroom door open and the specific sound of luggage being dragged across the hallway floor. The sound that I know from 40 years of travel, the particular resistance of a suitcase on a hardwood surface. And then the front door opening and a thud that was large enough to travel through the walls of the house and reach me in the kitchen where I stood with the coffee still in my hand. I walked to the front door. My suitcase was on the lawn. My smaller bag was beside it. A cardboard box containing my books. I had been here 8 months and had unpacked only my books. Was upended at the edge of the porch steps. The books scattered across the step and the walkway below. Several of them had landed face down with their spines at angles that will have creased them. And I want to say that this specific detail, the creased spines, is the one that produced in me the specific quality of cold clarity that the situation required, because books treated that way are not the product of haste. They are the product of deliberate indifference. My daughter-in-law was standing in the doorway. Her name is Vivienne Marchand-Fontaine, and she is 41 years old, and she was wearing the silk robe she wears on weekend mornings and carrying the cup of coffee she had already made herself. And she looked at me with the expression of someone who has decided something and is waiting to see how the decided thing lands. "This house is too crowded," she said. "Go find somewhere else to live. You go beg for food if you have to." I looked at my books on the walkway. I looked at the suitcase on the lawn. I looked at Vivian in the doorway of the house whose mortgage guarantee bore my name. "All right," I said. I picked up the books. I stacked them back in the box. I carried the box to my car, which was in the driveway, and I loaded the suitcase and the small bag. I did this without hurry, because hurry was not the appropriate pace for the situation, and because a woman who has spent 70 years managing difficult things understands that the appropriate pace is the one that allows you to think clearly while your hands do the necessary work. I was aware, while I loaded the car, of Vivian still in the doorway. She was watching me with the specific expression of a person whose decisive action has not produced the response they anticipated. She had expected protest or distress. What she received was a 70-year-old woman systematically loading her car. What I was thinking while I loaded the car, I was thinking about the mortgage guarantee document I had signed in Cecile's office in 2022, and about the withdrawal clause that Cecile had walked me through at the time, and about what would happen if that clause were exercised. I had been thinking about exercising it for 3 months. I had been waiting for the moment of absolute clarity. Vivian had given me the moment. When everything was in the car, I got in. I did not look back at Vivian in the doorway. I drove to my attorney's office. My name is Adele Christine Fontaine. I am 70 years old, and I have been many things in my life: a school teacher, a single mother, a property owner, and for the past 6 years, the person who has been quietly holding the financial infrastructure of my son's household together while that household has been treating me as an inconvenience. I am not, I want to say clearly, a person who begs for food. I am a person who owns the house my son's wife just threw my belongings out of. And I am a person who understands what a mortgage guarantee is and what happens when it is withdrawn. The morning was about to become very different from what Vivienne had planned. I want to say one more thing about that drive from the Ardsley Park house to Cecile's office. And because the drive is part of the account, and because what I thought about on the drive is relevant to everything that follows. I drove through the Savannah neighborhoods, the live oaks, the squares, the specific quality of morning light in a coastal southern city in late September, and I thought about the 23 years I had been saving before I bought Camellia Street. I thought about the specific dollar amounts I remembered, the $3,800 I had put in the savings account in 1990, the year I went back to work full-time after taking 2 months after Marcus's father left, the $11,000 I had saved by 1995, the year I got the small raise that allowed me to increase my monthly savings amount, the $47,000 in 2001, or the year I thought seriously about using some of it for a car that was more reliable than the one I was driving but did not, because the car could last another year, and the savings were more important. I thought about all of this, not because the numbers are interesting, but because the numbers are what the house is made of. Every dollar in the Camellia Street house is a decision I made, a thing I chose not to buy, a repair I delayed, a vacation I did not take. The house is the physical form of 23 years of those decisions, and I had offered the house as security for my son's mortgage, which means I had offered 23 years of decisions as security. The offering had been an act of love. The suitcase on the lawn was the answer I had received. I drove to Cecile's office, and I was entirely clear about what needed to happen next. The house on Camellia Street in Savannah, Georgia, is mine. This is a fact of property law and a fact of family history, and I want to establish it clearly before anything else, because the entire account depends on understanding what is mine and what is not and why. I purchased the house in 2004 with money I had saved over 23 years of teaching school in Chatham County, supplemented by a modest inheritance from my mother, and the proceeds from the sale of the smaller house where I had raised my son Marcus alone after his father left in 1989. The Camellia Street house cost $212,000, which was at the high end of what I could afford, and I bought it because it had a back garden with a pecan tree that reminded me of the pecan tree in the yard where I grew up, and because the ceilings were high and the light was good, and because I had been looking for a house that felt like mine for 23 years, and this one did. I have owned it outright since 2019, when I made the final payment on the 15-year mortgage I had taken at the time of purchase. At the time of the events I am describing, the house is free and clear, no mortgage, no liens, no encumbrances of any kind except the one I had created voluntarily and that I was about to withdraw. Marcus came to me in 2022 with a proposal. He and Vivian had been renting in Midtown Savannah for 4 years, had not been able to save a down payment sufficient for the properties they wanted, and had found what Marcus described as an excellent investment property in the Ardsley Park neighborhood, a duplex that needed renovation, and that could, he believed, generate rental income on one unit while they occupied the other. The price of the duplex was $460,000. Marcus and Vivian had $80,000 in savings. The bank would lend them $380,000 against the duplex, but the loan required additional security because their combined income, while adequate, was at the lower end of the bank's risk tolerance for this loan amount. Marcus asked me whether I would offer the Camellia Street house as additional collateral, a mortgage guarantee. He explained that the bank would place a lien on Camellia Street in the event of default, but that so long as the loan was current, the lien would remain dormant, and I would continue to live in my house undisturbed. He said, "It's just security, Mom. The bank needs to see that there's a backstop." I said yes. I said yes because Marcus is my son, and because the proposal seemed sound, and because I understood the legal structure of what I was agreeing to, and believed that Marcus and Vivian were capable of managing a rental property responsibly. What I did not say, what I should have said clearly and firmly, was that my agreement to guarantee the mortgage was conditional on being treated with the basic dignity of a person in her own home. I did not say it because it seemed unnecessary to say. I had not yet spent 8 months in this house. I had not yet met Vivian in the full sense of the word. Let me say something about the 23 years before the house, because they explain what the house means and why the guarantee was not a small thing for me to offer. I taught 4th grade at Gadsden Elementary for 23 years. I raised Marcus alone from 12 to 18. I saved every dollar above my immediate needs, not because I was miserly, but because I understood, with the specific clarity of a woman with no safety net and no second income, that the retirement and the house and the security had to come from what I earned and saved, and nothing else. I drove used cars. I bought clothes at stores where the quality was adequate and the price was not inflated. I did not take vacations I could not pay for outright. When I said yes to Marcus's mortgage proposal, and I was offering the concrete product of 23 years of careful living, the house was not an abstraction. It was the 23 years made solid. I offered it because Marcus is my son, and because the proposal seemed sound, and I believed he understood what I was offering. Vivienne Marchand. Fontaine is not a villain. I want to say this first, because the account is going to describe her behavior in terms that could be read as villainous, and the simplification would be both inaccurate and, in a specific way, unfair. Vivienne is a woman of 41 who grew up in circumstances that taught her specific things about how resources are distributed and who gets to determine the distribution. She grew up in a household where her mother managed everything, and where the management was the source of authority, and she has organized her adult life around a similar management instinct. The household that she controls is the household that functions correctly, and the people in it are organized around her management rather than around their own needs and preferences. This is not cruelty, exactly. It is the specific adaptation of someone who has decided that management is love, and who expresses love through management, and who cannot easily distinguish between caring for someone and controlling the conditions under which they live. I had seen this in Marcus before the move, the way he deferred to Vivian on decisions that affected both of them, the way he described her enthusiasm for a plan in terms that were more about her enthusiasm than about the plan's merits, the way he had said when he asked me to guarantee the mortgage, "Vivian thinks it's a really solid investment," as though Vivian's assessment were the relevant assessment rather than the bank's or my own. I had moved into the house in January because Marcus had asked me to, not because I needed housing. The Camellia Street house was fine, and I had been living in it alone and happily for 23 years. But Marcos had been in a period of difficulty, and Vivian had suggested, apparently, that having me nearby would be helpful and a good use of the space. And Marcus had relayed this as an invitation. I had accepted the invitation because Marcus is my son, and because I believed, which turned out to be incorrect, that helpful and a good use of the space were the honest description of Vivian's interest in having me there. The honest description, which I assembled over 8 months of careful observation, was different. Having me in the house was useful to Vivian because my presence could be leveraged for certain household functions that she did not want to pay for or do herself. And having me financially attached to the property through the mortgage guarantee was useful because it provided a security backstop that improved Marcus's financial position, and neither of these utilities required that I be treated as a full person in the household. I am not angry about this. Anger requires that you expected something different and were disappointed. I was not disappointed because I did not fully understand what I was moving into. And once I understood it, I had been there long enough to have completed the assessment I needed to make. The morning of the suitcase completed the assessment. I drove to my attorney's office. Let me tell you what the 8 months looked like, because the morning of the suitcase did not arrive without context. But the first month was the ordinary adjustment of 2 households learning to share a space. By the second month, a pattern was becoming visible. Vivian made household decisions without consulting me. Not deliberately, I think, at first. Simply without the reflex of including me in the consultation. The house had been organized around 2 people, and the habits were not adjusting. I mentioned this to Marcus in the 3rd month, gently and specifically. He said he would talk to Vivian. The specific thing I had mentioned was not changed. Nothing else changed. By the 4th month, I began the notebook, not in a spirit of grievance, but in the spirit of professional practice. If a situation is producing outcomes that concern you, you document it, because documentation tells you whether the concern is supported by evidence, and the evidence supported the concern. My authority over the household was treated as secondary to Vivian's management authority, which had no legal basis but had 8 months of habit behind it. I was consulted about things affecting only me, and not consulted about things affecting the household. I was included in meals when convenient, and not included when not. My attorney is a woman named Cecile Bernard, who has represented me on various matters since I bought the Camellia Street house in 2004. She is 55 years old and has the specific quality of an attorney who has handled enough property law and family law to be genuinely unsurprised by the range of things people do to each other, and who brings to every situation the specific calm that genuine unsurprisedness produces. I called her from the car before I arrived, which is my practice when I am on my way with something urgent. Forewarning is a courtesy that Cecile appreciates, and that makes the meeting more efficient. I need to withdraw my mortgage guarantee on the Ardsley Park property, I said when she answered. A brief pause. What happened? Vivian threw my belongings onto the front lawn and told me to go beg for food. Another brief pause, shorter than the first, which told me Cecile was already moving to practical mode. Are you all right? I'm fine. I'm in the car. My books are a bit damaged. Come straight to the office, she said. I arrived at Cecile's office at 9:47. She had coffee waiting, which was both practical and kind, and she had already pulled the mortgage guarantee documentation that I had signed in 2022. I want to explain the legal structure of what I had agreed to, because the structure is what made the withdrawal possible and what produced the specific consequences it produced. A mortgage guarantee, sometimes called a guarantee or a co-signor arrangement, and depending on the specific instrument, is a contractual commitment by a third party to satisfy a loan obligation if the primary borrower defaults. In the arrangement I had entered, I had agreed to make the Camellia Street house available as additional collateral. If Marcus and Vivian defaulted on the Ardsley Park mortgage, the bank could pursue remedies against Camellia Street as a secondary security. What most people do not fully understand about mortgage guarantees, what Marcus and Vivian, I believe, had not fully understood, is that the guarantee instrument typically contains provisions for withdrawal. The specific guarantee I had signed contained a withdrawal clause. I could withdraw the guarantee at any time with written notice to the bank. Subject to the bank's right to call the loan upon withdrawal if the primary collateral was insufficient on its own. The Ardsley Park property had appreciated since purchase. Marcus and Vivian had been making payments consistently. The loan-to-value ratio on the Ardsley Park property alone was within the bank's standard lending parameters. The Camellia Street guarantee had been taken as additional security at the time of origination, when the loan-to-value on Ardsley Park alone was at the edge of the bank's comfort zone. But the subsequent appreciation had changed the picture. Cecile had reviewed the current appraisal on Ardsley Park before I arrived. She had also looked at the loan balance. The Ardsley Park property on its own is borderline, she said. The bank will have discretion, and they may call the loan or they may accept the withdrawal and restructure. There's no certainty of outcome. I understand, I said. Adelaide. She looked at me. If they call the loan and Marcus and Vivian can't satisfy it, they lose the property. I understand, I said again. You've thought about this. I've been thinking about it for several months, I said. This morning made the decision final. She nodded. She began drafting the withdrawal notice. Marcus called me at 11:15. I was still at Cecile's office reviewing the draft withdrawal notice. Mom, what is going on? Vivian said. Marcus, I said, I'm going to let you finish, but I want to tell you first that I'm at Cecile's office and that I've asked her to begin drafting a withdrawal notice for the Ardsley Park mortgage guarantee. When you've finished, I want to have a conversation. I'm not going anywhere. A silence. Then, she said you left. My belongings were placed on the front lawn, I said. I relocated them to my car and left. Yes, that is accurate. She said you were planning to leave anyway. She said there was a disagreement. I thought about the word disagreement. I thought about the sound of my suitcase being dragged across the hallway floor, and the thud of the cardboard box against the porch step, and my books scattered on the walkway, with their spines at wrong angles. Marcus, I said, I would like to have an honest conversation with you. Not now. You're at work and you're managing what Vivian has told you, and this is not the right moment. I would like you to come to Cecile's office this afternoon, or if you prefer, I will come to wherever you are comfortable meeting. I want you to hear what happened directly from me before we discuss anything else. The mortgage guarantee, he said. Yes. I want to have the honest conversation first. Will you come this afternoon? He said he would come at 3. I want to tell you about Marcus, because Marcus is not the person Vivian's behavior might suggest he is, and because the account would be incomplete without him described as he actually is. Marcus is my only child, and he is 45 years old, and he is, in the combination of his qualities that I know most intimately, a person who is genuinely kind and also genuinely conflict avoidant, in the specific way of people who grew up watching their parent manage difficult things alone, and who have decided somewhere in the learning that the way to avoid difficulty is to avoid the conditions that produce it. The conditions that produce conflict in Marcus's life are the moments when Vivian's interests and other people's interests diverge, and the way he manages this divergence is by not looking at it directly. This is not malice. It is the specific avoidance of a man who loves his wife and loves his mother, and has spent 14 years deciding that the way to keep both relationships intact is to manage the space between them carefully enough that they never have to be in the same room with their actual requirements. The morning of the suitcase was the moment when the space collapsed. He arrived at 3 o'clock with the specific quality of a man who has spent 6 hours deciding what he wanted to say, and who has not arrived at a decision. I want to say something about why Marcus became the way he became, because the account is not complete without it. Marcus grew up watching me manage difficulty alone. He watched me handle the divorce, the single income, the daily decisions of a household with 1 adult and 1 child, and no slack in the system. That he watched me do it without visible distress, because I did not allow visible distress in front of him, because I had decided that visible distress in a parent terrifies a child. What he absorbed from the watching was the idea that difficulty is something you manage silently, and that the management is the success. The error in this learning is that management is not the same as resolution. I absorbed difficulties. The absorbing was invisible, and the invisibility produced in Marcus a model of difficulty that was about containment rather than address. He became a man who contains rather than resolves. The containing is genuinely kind in intention. He is protecting the people he loves from the distress of conflict. But the containing has costs, and the people who love him pay them. I do not blame him for this. I understand him, which is a different thing from excusing him. Cecile offered to leave us alone, and I asked her to stay. She is my attorney and my advocate, and her presence ensures that what is said is heard clearly, and that what is agreed to is documented if agreement is reached. Marcus knows Cecile. He did not object. We sat in her conference room, Cecile at the end, Marcus and I on the same side of the table, which was my choice, because I wanted him to understand that I was not across from him. I told him what had happened. I told it in the specific factual sequence that I have described here. The sound of the suitcase being dragged, the front door opening, the thud, the books on the walkway, Vivian in the doorway in her silk robe. I told him what she had said. I told it without editorial, because editorial is what you add when you are not certain the facts are sufficient, and then the facts were sufficient. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't understand why she did it." "Marcus," I said, "the why is a question for your marriage. What I need to address with you is the situation as it is, and what happens next. The mortgage guarantee, he said. Yes, I said. I want to be direct with you about what I am considering and why. I am considering withdrawing the guarantee because the events of this morning have made clear to me that my position in your household is not what I understood it to be when I agreed to the guarantee. I agreed to the guarantee as part of a relationship with you that I understood to include certain basic conditions of respect and dignity. Those conditions have been violated in a way that I cannot disregard. He looked at me. If you withdraw the guarantee, the bank will assess the Ardsley Park property's value against the current loan balance, I said. Cecile has looked at the numbers. The property has appreciated. The outcome is uncertain. The bank may call the loan, or it may accept a restructured arrangement. I don't know which they will choose. If they call the loan, we lose the property. Yes, I said, you may. A silence. He looked at his hands. Then, is this a negotiation? No, I said. It is not a negotiation. I am telling you what is happening and why, and I am giving you the opportunity to understand it fully before it proceeds. I am not using the guarantee as leverage to extract something from you. I am withdrawing it because it was extended in the context of a relationship that had certain conditions, and those conditions have been unambiguously violated. He was quiet for a long time. She told me to beg for food, Marcus. Those were her words. He looked up. Something in his face had changed. The conflict avoidance quality had been replaced by something that I recognized from when he was young, and had understood something fully, and was not going to look away from it. I know, he said. I believe you. I know you do, I said. There was a pause in which Cecile, with the specific discretion of someone who understands when she is not the person the room is waiting for, made a small note on her legal pad and said nothing. Marcus looked at me for a long time across the small space between us on the same side of the table. He had the expression of a man in the middle of honest reckoning, not comfortable, not finished, but present. I could see him choosing not to look away. I should have addressed this earlier, he said. I knew things were not right. I told myself stories, and the stories let me not do anything. That is on me. Yes, I said, and it is also on me for not naming it clearly when it was still small enough to address simply. The naming felt ungracious. The not naming was worse. So we both waited, he said. We both waited, I said. And then it was not small anymore. Cecile filed the withdrawal notice at 4:15 that afternoon. The bank received the withdrawal notice on a Monday morning. I know this because Cecile's office confirmed receipt with the bank's legal department. I know what happened next because Cecile had told me what the likely scenarios were, and because Marcus kept me informed, with the specific quality of a man who has decided that honesty with his mother is the path he is going to walk from here forward. The bank reviewed the withdrawal notice and the current property appraisal for Ardsley Park, and the current loan balance over a period of 4 business days. The 4 business days were 4 days of specific waiting. I was at Eleanor's house during those days. Eleanor was good company in the way she has always been. She did not press me about what I was feeling. She provided meals, conversation, and the occasional pointed observation that she has always been willing to offer because she has known me for 40 years. I was not anxious during those 4 days. Anxiety is the state of a person who does not know what they would do with the various outcomes. I knew what I would do with each outcome the bank could produce. If they called the loan and Marcus and Vivian lost the property, I would help them find a place to live and offer the financial assistance my means allowed. If the bank accepted a restructured arrangement, I would be glad. The outcome was going to arrive whether or not I worried about it. I would rather be rested when it did. Eleanor said on the third day, "You're not worried." It was not a question. I said, "I'm waiting, and the waiting is not the same as not worrying." She said, "What are you waiting for?" "For the outcome to arrive," I said. She looked at me with the expression she reserves for when I have said something she agrees with and finds slightly exasperating. Then she poured more tea. On the fifth day, the bank called Marcus. The Ardsley Park property had appreciated since purchase, which was the favorable part of the picture. The loan balance had been reduced by 3 years of payments, which was also favorable. But the current loan-to-value ratio on Ardsley Park alone, without the Camellia Street guarantee, was at the edge of the bank's internal lending guidelines, not catastrophically over the line, but over it. And the bank's assessment was that the loan as currently structured required the additional security that the Camellia Street guarantee had provided. The bank gave Marcus and Vivian 3 options. The first was to bring the loan into compliance by paying down the principal to a level that brought the loan-to-value ratio within guidelines, approximately $47,000. The second was to refinance at terms that reflected the current risk profile without the additional guarantee, which would result in a higher interest rate and higher monthly payments. The third was to allow the bank to call the loan, in which case the full outstanding balance, approximately $310,000, would be due within 60 days. Marcus and Vivian did not have $47,000 available, and their savings had been substantially consumed by the renovations on the Ardsley Park property, which had exceeded the initial budget by approximately $30,000. A fact that Marcus told me during our first honest conversation, and that I had not known before. The refinancing option was available, but produced a monthly payment increase of approximately $400, which, combined with the reduced rental income they were receiving on the second unit. A long-standing tenant had recently moved out, and the unit was vacant, created a cash flow problem that Vivian had described in the conversation Marcus relayed to me as impossible to sustain. The bank's 60-day clock began. I want to say something about how I received this information, because the receiving is part of the account. I was at the Camellia Street house when Marcus called to tell me about the bank's assessment. I was in the kitchen making tea, and I was looking out the window at the pecan tree in the back garden. The pecan tree that had been one of the reasons I bought this house. That reminded me of the tree in the yard where I grew up. The tree was in its full late summer abundance, the leaves dark green, and the developing pecans visible in their casings. Marcus told me about the 3 options and about why 2 of them were difficult, and about the 60-day clock, and I listened without saying anything until he finished. Then I said, "Marcus, I want you to know that I am not glad about this. I want to be honest with you about that. The withdrawal of the guarantee was the right action, and I do not regret it. But I do not take any pleasure in the difficulty it is creating for you, and I want you to know that." I know, Mom, he said. I also want you to know that if there is a path through this that does not involve you losing the property, I am willing to hear it. Not the guarantee. That is not available. But if there is something else, I am willing to hear it. He was quiet. Then, I'll talk to Vivian. Vivian called me on a Thursday afternoon, 11 days after the morning of the suitcase. I was at Eleanor's, my oldest friend, who lives 3 streets from Camellia Street, and who had been providing a specific combination of good food and honest conversation during the weeks since the incident. Vivian said, "I need to talk to you." I said, "All right." She said, "Can we meet?" I said, "Come to Camellia Street tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. She came at 10. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table where I have had every significant conversation in this house, and Vivian sat across from me with the specific quality of a person who has prepared what she wants to say and is not certain it is the right thing. She said, "I want to apologize for what I said, the words I used, and they were cruel, and I knew they were cruel when I said them, and I said them anyway." I said, "I believe you." She said, "I also want to try to explain because I don't think the explanation excuses it, but I think you deserve to hear it." I said, "Go ahead." She said that she had been managing for 8 months what she described as the feeling that the house was not mine anymore. She said that when I moved in, the house had changed, not in the physical sense, though I had my books in the sitting room and my specific ways of using the kitchen, but in the sense of authority. She had been the managing person in the household for 7 years, and my arrival had introduced a different kind of authority, older, quieter, but present in a way that had felt to her like a diminishment of her own. She said, "I know that doesn't make what I did right." "No," I said, "it doesn't. But I want you to know that it wasn't about not wanting you there," she said. "It was about being afraid of what your being there meant for how the household was organized." I thought about this. I thought about the 8 months. The mornings when my contribution to the household was received as an intrusion. The evenings when I had felt the specific quality of being tolerated rather than welcomed. The way my authority over the house, which was my legal right, my registered deed, had been treated as an irregularity rather than a foundation. I said, "Vivian, the house is mine. That is a legal fact that does not change because you have been living in it and organizing it for 8 months. The authority that fact gives me is not a threat to you. It is the structure within which we were all supposed to be living. I think what happened is that the structure was never made clear, and the absence of clarity allowed a different understanding to develop, and the different understanding was wrong." She looked at me. "You were not managing my property," I said. "You were living in it as my guest, while your husband and I had a separate financial arrangement that concerned the Ardsley Park property. Those are different things. I think the confusion of those two things is what produced the morning of the suitcase." I also thought about something I had not allowed myself to fully name while living in the house. What it feels like, at 70, to be managed, to have your presence in a space assessed for its utility rather than its own worth. I had absorbed this without naming it, because naming it would have required a confrontation I was not ready for, and the not naming allowed it to accumulate for 8 months, until the suitcase made the confrontation unavoidable. I did not say any of this to Vivian. What I said was the thing that needed to be said. The 8 months of feeling were mine to carry. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Can you fix this?" I said, "I don't know. Tell me what you and Marcus have decided to do." Marcus and Vivian chose the refinancing option. This was, in Cecile's assessment and in mine, the correct choice. The $47,000 paydown was not available, and the 60-day bank call was a risk neither of them was willing to accept. The refinancing resulted in a higher monthly payment, $412 more per month than the original loan, but it was a manageable increase if the second unit was occupied. The second unit was occupied within 3 weeks of the refinancing by a couple who had been on a waiting list with a local property management company. Marcus had retained the management company on my advice, a conversation we had had during the period between the withdrawal notice and the bank's decision, in which I had suggested that professional management was a better approach than direct landlording for people with full-time employment and limited property management experience. He had agreed. The refinancing and the new tenancy stabilized the cash flow. It was not comfortable. The first 6 months after the refinancing were financially tight, in a way that Marcus described to me, with the honest directness he had been practicing since the afternoon at Cecile's office. But they were managing. I want to tell you what happened to the question of the house on the Ardsley Park property, their home, and what happened to the question of my house on Camellia Street, because the two questions were related and the answer to both is the relevant ending of this account. Vivian and Marcus did not lose the Ardsley Park property. The refinancing was completed, the second unit was filled, the monthly payments were being met, the 60-day clock expired without catastrophe. The bank's lien on Camellia Street was released when the refinancing closed, and Camellia Street was again free and clear. I did not return to the Ardsley Park property. This was my decision, and it was made clearly and without extended deliberation. I had moved into that house as a guest, and the guest relationship had been violated in a way that made return inappropriate. Not impossible, but inappropriate. Vivian and I had had the conversation in my kitchen. The conversation had produced something honest and something that I believed was real. But honesty and reality do not always produce the conditions for continued cohabitation. And I had spent 23 years learning to trust my own assessment of what a space required. What that space required was for Marcus and Vivian to live in it as their own home, without me present as a daily reminder of the authority structure they had spent 8 months misunderstanding. I want to tell you something about the 3 months at Eleanor's house, because those months were not simply a waiting period. They had their own quality and importance. I spent them doing the things I do in a stable situation. I read, I cooked for myself and for Eleanor. I walked the 4-mile morning route that my body has memorized over years. I thought about my teaching years in a sustained way I had not allowed in a long time. The specific faces and names of children who are now in their 40s. The annual spring play I produced for 12 consecutive years because I agreed once and could not stop. The 3 students who came back specifically to tell me things, one a doctor, one a teacher in Atlanta, one who wrote me from the Peace Corps in 2003 and whose letter I still have. I also understood something I had not fully recognized before. I had been lonely at the Ardsley Park house, not for lack of company, but in the specific sense of being present without recognition, where my participation was organized around its utility to others rather than around my own needs. The contrast with Eleanor's house made the previous absence of recognition legible. Loneliness is not always absence. Sometimes it is the quality of presence without recognition. I was 69 when I moved in, and I am 70 now. I live on Camellia Street, where I have lived for 20 years, and where the pecan tree in the back garden is producing its fall harvest, and where my books are on the shelves where they belong, and where the spines have been straightened as best I could manage. I want to talk about what was owed in this situation, because the language of debt and obligation is appropriate here, and because I think the account is incomplete without naming it directly. Vivian owed me the basic dignity of a person in a house that was mine. This is not a complicated debt. It does not require special gratitude or elaborate acknowledgement. It requires only the minimum recognition that when you are living in a space that belongs to someone else, that someone else retains the authority that ownership conveys, and the authority is not transferred by the act of managing the space or organizing the household or being the more constant presence in the rooms. She did not pay this debt while I was living in the house. She paid a portion of it imperfectly and under the pressure of significant financial consequence. It's in the conversation in my kitchen on the Thursday 10 days after the suitcase. I owed Marcus honesty about what was happening. I had been documenting quietly in the way I have always documented difficult situations in a notebook that I have kept since the first year of teaching, when a supervisor told me that a teacher who does not write down what happens cannot prove what happened. The incidents over 8 months. The mornings when I was made to feel that my presence was an imposition. The occasions when my authority over the house was treated as subordinate to Vivian's management preferences. The specific accumulation of small indignities that are each individually deniable, but that are, in aggregate, a pattern. I had not told Marcus about this documentation because telling him would have required him to choose between his mother and his wife before the situation had clarified itself sufficiently to make the choice legible. I was waiting for clarity. The suitcase was clarity. Marcus owed me his honesty about the financial situation, the renovation overruns, the vacant unit, the actual state of the Ardsley Park investment. He had been managing my knowledge of the situation the way he manages conflict, by controlling what information I had access to, so that the information available to me was never sufficient to produce the response he feared. He has been paying this debt in installments since the afternoon at Cecile's office. The installments are genuine, and I receive them as such. What no one owed anyone, which I want to say clearly because the account might seem to suggest otherwise, was punishment. The withdrawal of the guarantee was not a punishment. It was a legal action that had a specific legal basis and that produced consequences that were appropriate to the action that prompted it. That the consequences were significant for Marcus and Vivian was a function of the financial structure they had built, not of any desire on my part to cause them harm. I did not want them to lose the Ardsley Park property. I wanted Vivian to understand that the woman whose belongings she had thrown onto the front lawn was not a person without resources or authority, or the willingness to use them. She understands this now. I want to say one more thing about the obligation structure of this situation, because I think it is important, and because it is easy to misread the account as being about Vivian's failure and the consequences that failure produced. The deeper failure was structural. It was the failure to establish, at the beginning of the living arrangement, the clear terms that would have prevented the subsequent drift. The terms were not established because I did not establish them, because establishing them felt unnecessary and slightly ungracious. I was moving into my son's household temporarily as a guest. Guests do not typically arrive with legal memos about the authority structure of the space they are inhabiting. But I was not an ordinary guest. I was the owner of the property that made the household's financial existence possible. And I was moving into a household managed by a person whose instinct was to organize every household she inhabited around her own management authority. The collision of these two things was foreseeable, and the foreseeable collision should have been addressed before it happened. I did not address it. That is part of the accounting, and I want the accounting to be honest. I want to say something about the books, because the books are the detail I keep returning to, and because what I feel about the books is more complicated than simple anger at their mistreatment. The books in the cardboard box were a specific selection, not my full library, which had stayed at Camellia Street during the 8 months I was at the Ardsley Park House, but the books I had chosen to bring with me as a kind of portable version of myself. A few novels I had read so many times the spines were already soft. 2 histories of Georgia that I had used when I was teaching, a collection of essays that a student had given me at the end of the last year I taught, a Bible that had belonged to my mother. My mother's Bible had landed face down on the porch step. The cover was scuffed, and one of the pages near the beginning, Genesis, and the early chapters, was slightly bent at the corner. I want to be honest about what I felt when I picked it up. Not anger exactly. Something older and quieter than anger. The specific sadness of seeing something irreplaceable, handled as though it were not irreplaceable by someone who did not know what it was. Vivian did not know the Bible was my mother's. She did not know that my mother had written small annotations in the margins, in her particular handwriting, the handwriting of a woman who had been a church secretary for 30 years, and who had the specific cursive of a generation that was taught penmanship with the same seriousness as arithmetic. She did not know that I had carried this Bible from my mother's house when she died in 1998, and that it had been in my possession for 26 years, and that its presence in the cardboard box had been, for those 26 years, a form of my mother's presence. She did not know these things because she had not been told them and had not asked, and not knowing them was itself a statement about the kind of attention she had been paying to the person who lived in the same house as her for 8 months. This is what I mean when I say that the books are the detail I return to, not the physical damage, which was minor and mostly repairable. The specific quality of handling something as though it were furniture when it is actually a person's history. My mother's Bible is back on the shelf in the study at Camellia Street, but the bent page corner has been carefully straightened. The cover scuff is there, and it will remain, and I have decided to accept it as the permanent record of what happened on that morning. Not a wound, but a mark. The marks on things are often the most accurate history we have. I showed Marcus the Bible when he came to Camellia Street 2 weeks after the incident. I showed him the cover and the bent page and the annotations in my mother's handwriting. I did not say anything. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I told him I knew he was. He held the Bible for a moment, in the specific way of a person who is holding something they finally understand the weight of. He set it down on the table between us. He did not say anything else about it. He did not need to. I want to say something about what my mother's Bible meant in that context. Not in the religious sense, which is private, but in the historical sense. My mother had owned this Bible for 50 years before she died. She had carried it from her mother's house in rural Georgia when she moved to Savannah in 1954. She had written her wedding date in the front cover in her careful handwriting. She had written Marcus's birth date and mine in the family record pages. She had made annotations in the margins for 30 years of church secretary work, small notes in pencil that decoded the passages for the specific context of the sermons she had typed and filed. The Bible is not primarily a book. It is a record. It contains in its margins and its inscribed dates and its careful handwriting several lives. My mother's, her mother's, mine, Marcus's. The record is irreplaceable in the specific sense that no copy of it can exist. The handwriting is my mother's hand. The dates are the dates. The life is the life. Vivian put this record in a cardboard box and tossed it onto a porch step. She did not know what she was handling. That is the most accurate statement about the whole situation, and not only about the Bible. She did not know what she was handling in the house. She did not know what she was handling in the financial arrangement. She did not know what she was handling when she stood in the doorway in her silk robe and told me to go beg for food. Knowledge is not always ignorance's excuse, but it is its explanation. I am in the kitchen at Camellia Street as I write this. The pecan tree in the back garden is in its October fullness. The pecans dropping in the light wind, the specific sound of them landing on the flagstone path that Bernard laid the year before. He and I stopped seeing each other, which is another story. The kitchen smells of the coffee I made an hour ago and the bread I baked yesterday, because baking bread is what I do on Saturdays, when I am not otherwise occupied. And the Saturday rhythm of this house is something I love. Marcus comes to Sunday dinner. This has been the arrangement for 6 weeks since I returned to Camellia Street. And in those 6 weeks, it has become what Sunday dinners are supposed to become. Not an obligation or a negotiated peace, but a genuine gathering of a mother and her son around a table where honest things can be said. Vivienne has come twice. The first time was uncomfortable in the specific way of two people who have said difficult things to each other and are not yet certain how to be in the same room. The second time was less uncomfortable. I do not expect the third to be easy, but I expect it to be better than the second, and better than the second is the direction I want. The Ardsley Park property is generating rental income from both units now. The second tenant, the couple who moved in, have been, by Marcus's account, excellent. They pay on time. They keep the unit in good condition. They are pleasant to deal with. The cash flow has stabilized. Marcus told me this with the genuine relief of a man for whom financial stability is not abstract, but is the concrete thing that allows him to sleep. Cecile confirmed last week that the Camellia Street deed is clean. no liens, no encumbrances, no obligations of any kind. The house is mine entirely, in the full and clear sense, for the first time since I agreed to the guarantee in 2022. I want to say something about the word eviction, because it is in the title of this account, and because the title is not entirely accurate, and I want to address that honestly. What Vivian did was not a legal eviction. A legal eviction requires a court process, proper notice, and the specific procedural steps that Georgia law mandates. What she did was put my belongings on the lawn and tell me to leave, which is a form of attempted de facto eviction, the use of physical displacement to produce a result that the legal process would not support. It was not effective in the legal sense because you cannot evict the owner of a property from their own property, but it was effective in the practical sense that I chose to leave, at least temporarily, and the choosing to leave produced the consequences it produced. She attempted to evict the owner. The owner withdrew the financial guarantee that made the house possible. The house she had treated as hers to manage was nearly lost. The person she had told to go beg for food left with her books in a cardboard box and came back 3 months later to Sunday dinners. This is not, I want to say, a story of triumph. I do not feel triumphant. I feel tired in the way that difficult things leave you tired. And I feel sad for the time that was lost to the misunderstanding that 8 months of poor handling produced. And I feel something that is not quite hope, but is the direction that hope comes from. The sense that the honest reckoning has happened, and that what comes after honest reckonings is better than what preceded them. The person who attempts to evict the person who actually owns the house will soon discover that ownership is not a preference or a management style. It is a legal fact with legal consequences. Vivienne discovered this. The discovery was expensive and frightening and entirely avoidable if the legal facts had been respected from the beginning. I am Adele Christine Fontaine. I am 70 years old. I own a house with a pecan tree in the back garden. My mother's Bible is on the shelf in my study with a small scuff on the cover that I have decided to keep. My son comes to Sunday dinner. The pecans are falling. This is mine. I have been thinking in the weeks since I returned about what I did not know before the 8 months. I did not know how completely a management instinct can fill a space when it is the dominant organizing principle of a household. Vivienne did not set out to make me feel like a guest. She set out to organize, and the organizing happened to produce that effect. The distinction between intentional and structural harm is one I understand intellectually. Teachers learn this early, but experiencing it daily is a different thing from knowing it. I also did not know how much space Camellia Street had been taking up in me in its absence. I noticed this when I came back. The specific quality of walking through the door of your own house after a period away. The way the rooms receive you as something they recognize. Eleanor's house was comfortable, and her company was restorative, but it was not this. The reciprocity between a person and the house they have lived in for 20 years is only fully legible from the inside of it. Last Sunday, Marcus told me he had been thinking about what I said about the model I had taught him. Containment instead of resolution. He said he had not understood when I said it, that I was also describing something I had done that had costs. He thought I was only describing something he had done. It had taken him several weeks to hear both parts. I told him that was a fair reading of something that was genuinely two things. And he said, I want to do it differently. I don't know how yet, but I want to. I said, the wanting is the beginning. The how follows from the wanting if the wanting is genuine. He looked at me in the way he has had since he was small, when I have said something that is both true and requires something of him. Then he helped himself to more bread. This is mine. I want to close this account with a word about what I believe ownership actually means, because the account is called the eviction, and the eviction was an act about ownership, and I want the word to be said correctly. Ownership is not control. It is not the right to determine what happens in a space without reference to the people who share it. It is not a performance of authority or a hierarchy of worth. Ownership, in the sense that matters most to me, is the specific responsibility of stewardship. You hold the thing, and the holding requires that you care for it, attend to it, preserve what it is, and work with what it gives you. I have been a steward of Camellia Street for 20 years. I have maintained the house, planted the garden, loved the pecan tree, welcomed the people who have come through it, and organized my life around the specific daily practice of caring for the space I inhabit. This is what ownership means to me. Vivian wanted to manage the house. Management is not stewardship. Management is the imposition of an organizational system on a space, which can produce a well-organized space, but which does not require the specific relationship with the space that stewardship requires. You can manage a house you are indifferent to. You cannot steward a house you are indifferent to. I am not indifferent to Camellia Street. I have been in relationship with it for 20 years. The relationship is not dramatic. I do not talk to the house. I do not feel that it has a personality in the way that some people feel about old houses. What I feel is the specific comfort of a space that knows you. The morning light in the kitchen at this time of year. The particular warmth of the kitchen in winter when the oven is on. The sound the third porch step makes when you step on it. The way the pecan tree looks in June when it is in full leaf. Vivian will learn this about Ardsley Park if she stays in it long enough and attends to it correctly. The house will become legible to her, and the specific details of a space become legible when you have lived in them long enough and with enough attention. This is not something you can rush or manage into existence. It arrives when the time is sufficient and the attention is present. I hope she gives it the time and the attention. The house deserves it, and so does she. I want to close with the pecan tree because the pecan tree is where this account begins and where it ends. The tree was here when I arrived in 2004, and it was mature then, with the girth and spread of a pecan that has been in the same ground for a long time. The tree does not know me. Trees do not know the people who live under them. But the relationship between a person and a tree they have lived with for 20 years is real, even if one-directional. The tree gives without requiring that I appreciate it. And I appreciate it without requiring that the tree know I do. This is what most good things in a life are like. They give without requiring acknowledgement. The giving and receiving is more satisfying than the accounting. The accounting, I can tell you from experience, is less satisfying than it looks from the outside. I am Adele Christine Fontaine. I am 70 years old. My son comes to Sunday dinner. The bread is cooling on the counter. The pecan tree is dropping its harvest. This is mine. The person who evicted the homeowner will soon have nowhere to go. This is the meaning the account is supposed to carry. I want to say it correctly. The person who attempted to evict me did not lose her home. She nearly lost it. She did not lose it because the refinancing was available and the tenants came and the cash flow stabilized. She still lives in the Ardsley Park house. She will, if she does the work, grow into a person who understands what a house requires of the people who live in it. The meaning is not that she ended up homeless. The meaning is that she understood what it feels like to face the loss of your home because someone else has the legal authority to make a decision that affects yours. She understood it in the 60-day clock and the bank assessment and the empty second unit and the payment increase that their savings could not cover. That understanding was the consequence the situation required. She has not said this to me in those terms, but I believe she understands it in the way people understand things they have been made to live through rather than merely told. This is mine.